I invite the Minister of Advanced Education and Skills Training to lead the House in prayer or reflection.
I invite all members to begin our day in unity and strive to work through our day with our best intentions. I invite everyone to be at one heart and one mind as we pray and reflect. May our personal faith give us wisdom to be good leaders. The pandemic has challenged us to realize life's fragility. Creator of life, we pray for your guidance. We pray that you grant us humility, wisdom, clarity, and courage. On a glorious day as such, may we be reminded that there are people in our community in need, in pain, in sorrow. We pray for those who are hungry and suffering poverty. We pray for those who are unwell or facing health challenges. We pray for those who are facing personal difficulties. We pray for those who are mourning the loss of a loved one. We also put those who are celebrating in our prayers, those who are graduating, having a birthday, getting a promotion, or welcoming a new birth. We gather here today with sincerity of doing good work. We seek to represent fairly and serve well those who have given us this task. May our efforts be blessed with insight, guided by our individual authenticity to serve all the people of British Columbia. May our personal faith give us strength to act honestly and fairly in all matters before us, today and every day. Amen.
Introductions by members. Minister of Children and Family Development.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Today, watching us are Jenny Fay and Sterling Wakefield from Mayfield in East Sussex in England, and from neighbouring Kent, the original, Russell Wakefield and his family Ilse, Darren, Alina and Louise. I hope that the members will make very welcome my mum, two brothers and their family. Thank you.
Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation.
Mr. Speaker, I rise virtually in this House to introduce Chief Ron Sam of the Songhees First Nation and Chief Councillor Rob Thomas of Esquimalt First Nation and members of their respective nations. The Lekwungen people are joined by members of neighboring nations today, and they are currently en route by canoe to the Legislative Assembly. They arrived this afternoon to mark the 215th hour since the legislature lowered its flag to half-mast in recognition of the lost children from the former Kamloops residential school. Will the members of the House please join me in making them welcome today?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to acknowledge that one of our colleagues who has since retired from this House, MLA Diane Thorne, who used to represent Coquitlam-Millardville, her husband passed away a number of weeks ago, and I would ask that the Speaker, on behalf of all of us here in the Legislature, please send our condolences.
Member for Surrey White Rock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Cannon Beach, Oregon holds a special place in my heart for two reasons. One is because it was where Goonies was filmed, and I don't know if members of this House are familiar with Goonies, but yes. More importantly than that, it was the place where I married my best friend 8 years ago today, Holly Unwin. And I just wanted to wish her a very happy anniversary. I've already done that this morning, and I will continue to do that throughout the day. Yeah, and an Elvis impersonator showing up to serenade her while I'm not there. But I just want to wish my lovely wife a very, very happy anniversary. Thank you.
Member for Saanich North and Islands.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, I rise virtually to celebrate two birthdays. And as I get to know my colleague from Cowichan Valley, I find new and interesting ways that our lives have become intertwined with each other. And as we work in this legislature and day in and day out, that's one of the ways. But I think that it's important to acknowledge that my colleague's celebrating her birthday today, as is my father and Carl Olson. And so I'm not going to disclose any ages, any numbers today. We'll just leave that to another time. But I just want to say a very happy birthday to both my father, Carl, and to my friend and colleague from Cowichan Valley. Thank you.
Madam Clerk.
Introduction of bills.
Minister of Children and Family Development.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to present a message from Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor.
Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor transmits herewith Bill number 14, entitled Early Childhood Educators Act, and recommends the same to the Legislative Assembly. Minister.
I move that Bill 14 be introduced and read a first time now. Mr. Speaker, it's my honour to introduce the Early Childhood Educators Act. The Early Childhood Educators Act is an important part of our ongoing work to better support early childhood educators, and it lays the foundation for the work ahead. The Act removes the regulation of ECEs and ECE assistants from the Community Care and Assisted Living Act and creates a new statute under the authority of the Minister responsible for childcare. By bringing these pieces together under a new standalone Act, we're making it clear how critical early childhood educators are to BC families and communities. The new statute provides for the registration and oversight of early childhood educators and EC assistants, as well as the approval of post-secondary ECE programs through a public registry. This will help improve public confidence because childcare providers and parents can trust that the early childhood educators registered with the ECE registry meet a high-quality standard. The Act will help to reduce barriers to certifications for ECEs. The statute also gives the registrar authority to issue temporary certificates so internationally trained ECEs can work in their profession while getting certified here in BC. As we enter the fourth year of our 10-year childcare plan, now is the time to make sure the workforce behind the workforce and the heart of childcare, BC's early childhood educators, are well supported. The Early Childhood Educators Act is an important step in the right direction and will help ensure the profession continues to grow for generations to come. Thank you.
Members, the question is the first reading of the bill. Those who are participating remotely, have your voting cards ready. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose, motion carried. Minister.
Speaker, I move that the bill be placed on the orders of the day for second reading at the next sitting of the House after today.
Members, you heard the motion. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose, motion carried. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to present a message from Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor.
Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor transmits herewith Bill number 15, entitled Early Learning and Childcare Act, and recommends the same to the Legislative Assembly. Minister.
I move that Bill 15 be introduced and read a first time now. Mr. Speaker, it's my honour to introduce the Early Learning and Childcare Act. The Early Learning and Childcare Act has been a long time coming and is an important step towards our goal of making inclusive, universal childcare a reality in British Columbia. The new Act combines and streamlines the existing Childcare BC Act and the Childcare Subsidy Act. The ELCC Act authorises the use of childcare grants to improve the inclusiveness of childcare and support Indigenous-led childcare. The Act will also require the Minister of Children and Family Development to produce an annual report on the actions the province has taken to support inclusive, affordable, accessible, quality, universal childcare, support the connection between childcare and K-12 education and provide a smooth transition between the two, and collaborate with Indigenous peoples on childcare matters. This coordinated cross-government reporting approach will help increase transparency and identify government's actions towards implementing an inclusive, universal childcare system. The Act will establish the authority for the Ministry to enact new regulations in the future, including the ability to set limits on parent fees for childcare to help keep costs down for families. While there's more to do, the Act will move British Columbia further along the path to inclusive, universal childcare, which will make a huge difference to BC families, our communities, and our economy. Thank you.
Members, you heard the motion. All those in favour indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose indicate nay. Motion carried. Minister.
Speaker, I move that the bill be placed on the orders of the day for second reading at the next sitting of the House after today.
Again, members, you heard the motion. All those in favour indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose, motion carried. Member for Surrey South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the bill entitled Equal Pay Reporting Act, of which notice has been given in my name on the order paper, be introduced and read a first time now. Our world has changed significantly over the past year. However, one thing that hasn't changed is the need for equal pay legislation. After waiting for government to act, I once again rise for the fourth time to take action and bring equal pay legislation to debate. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the deep inequities within our system and reminds us that until the gender pay gap is closed, true equity in our economy and our communities can't be achieved. Monthly labour force survey results continue to demonstrate that women, and in particular young women, have been more adversely impacted by pandemic job losses. That's in addition to British Columbia recording the worst gender pay gap in Canada at 18.6%. It's essential for them and all women in our province that we look forward to building a better, more equal economy for the future, and we must act to ensure that the inequities of the past don't continue. The bill introduced today would require businesses of prescribed size to report out on the pay gap they have between male and female employees. A change to previous versions of the bill, as government has refused to call previous versions on disagreement with the threshold at which businesses would become subject to the Act. Today's legislation leaves the threshold to be set by regulation, so I look forward to government calling the bill for debate. Let's finally get serious about working together on gender equity. There is ample time to get this legislation passed this legislative session. Let's work together to get it done.
Members, you heard the motion. All those in favour indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose, motion carried. Member.
Mr. Speaker, I move the bill be placed on the orders of the day for second reading at the next sitting after today.
Again, members, you heard the motion. All those in favour indicate aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Madam Clerk.
Statements by members.
Member for West Vancouver Sea to Sky.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today marks the United Nations World Oceans Day, and in a coastal province like British Columbia, we have a great deal to appreciate. Yet at the same time, we need to address some of the greatest threats against our ocean's health. The ocean covers more than 70% of the planet, and we depend on it to produce at least 50% of the planet's oxygen. As you may also understand, it's a main source of protein for more than 1 billion people around the world. We also depend on the ocean for our global economy, and the United Nations estimates 40 million people will be employed in ocean-based industries by 2030. However, with 90% of the big fish populations depleted and 50% of the coral reefs on their way to destruction, we are clearly not on a sustainable path. The ocean's life and livelihoods is a theme for World Oceans Day in 2021. While the coastline of British Columbia stretches 954 kilometers from the tip of southern Vancouver Island to the community of Stewart, it actually totals more than 25,000 kilometers when all the island coastlines are included. People work and live all over this coast, and we must acknowledge its importance as a significant part of our provincial economy. Our ocean-based industries account for $17 billion worth of economic activity annually and employ 170,000 British Columbians in coastal communities stretching from the Salish Sea right up to the Alaskan border. In 2019, total sales of primary seafood production in British Columbia amounted to $1.1 billion. But sustainability is a key, Mr. Speaker, and given the size of the problem, it is complex. Among other concerns, the future health of our oceans will be dependent on our global collective efforts to effectively manage on and offshore fisheries, prevent the introduction of plastics into the ocean environment, and have a credible carbon plan. Mr. Speaker, we must add our voice in support of a United Nations Sustainable Objective 14, conserve and sustainably use the ocean, seas, and marine resources by 2030. A big task, Mr. Speaker, but it can be done.
Member for Vancouver Hastings.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. June is Filipino Heritage Month. It's a time for us to celebrate one of the fastest growing populations in our country. Within the last 5 years, the Philippines remains one of the top 5 sources of immigrants to my riding of Vancouver Hastings, and I'm so proud to be their MLA and represent them. Filipino Canadians are a prominent force in our province in cultural, social, artistic, economic, and volunteer contributions to every part of our society. During this pandemic, we've seen their significant contributions to every sector, including childcare and healthcare sectors, where many have been on the front lines keeping people safe and healthy. I want to thank all those frontline workers for all they have done to help us through this pandemic. Filipino Canadians continue to drive change as leaders in business, technology, and advocacy work across the city, and our communities are enriched by their presence. Unfortunately, Filipino Canadians have been on the receiving end of senseless acts of hate crimes that are on the rise in this city. In August 2020, a 61-year-old named Mary Lou was shoved against her car outside a Vancouver supermarket by a stranger. Even more recently, in May of this year, a Filipino man was assaulted by a stranger who followed him off a bus. The perpetrator cut his eyebrow and destroyed his cell phone. We must all stand in solidarity against these crimes. Nobody should feel unwelcome or unheard in BC or fear the threat of violence because of who they are. This month and every month, we look forward to connecting with and celebrating the Filipino community of Vancouver Hastings and honoring them for all that they bring to our neighborhood. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Kootenay East.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. June 7th, 2019 started as an average late spring day in Cranbrook, BC, but it wouldn't end this way, Mr. Speaker. Rob Amsing was outside cutting a lawn when he smelled what he thought was garbage. When he looked down the block, he could see what appeared to be a house that was on fire. Indeed, the house at 325 Fifth Avenue and the home of Scott and Jerry Pat Smith, whom they occupied with Scott's father, Gene, and their granddaughter, Mariah, was going up in flames. Rob ran toward the smoke and went to the front door to see if anyone was inside. Rob could see a dog barking through the smoke and kicked open the front door to retrieve the dog. Once inside, Rob found a confused and disorientated Gene Smith, approximately 85 years old at the time, and not aware that the house was on fire and not willing to leave. At that point, Rob was forced to take Gene out of the house, but in the meantime, the frightened dog ran back into the burning home. Rob then made a second selfless decision to go back into the house and round up the dog and bring him out. But this time, the house was very, very intense. The fire was very intense. Rob then made a third brave decision. He entered again to check and see if anyone else was in the home. By this time, flames were shooting across the ceiling. He later said that it was like a scene out of the movie Backdraft. Finding no one else, he exited just in time as there was a propane gas explosion on the back deck of the home, and the main floor of the house was leveled within minutes. Many valuables were lost that day, Mr. Speaker, but if Rob Amsing had not forced his way into the home when he did, the unthinkable loss of a beloved family member and a family pet would surely have happened. It should be noted that if not for the fearless efforts of the Cranbrook Professional Firefighters, Local 1253, the fire would have surely gone a lot further down the block due to the fire's intense heat and the very high winds that day. Rob Amsing is a hero, Mr. Speaker. Our community is grateful, and I am proud he is a constituent of Kootenay East.
Member for Chilliwack-Kent.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. It's that time again where I get to share just a little piece of the reason that I love my home of Chilliwack-Kent. Today I want to introduce you all to the Chilliwack-Vedder River Cleanup Society. The society was started by local anglers in 2002 to protect and care for the waterways we love so much. The society is entirely volunteer and engages in a range of activities, including Adopt a River and 2 large-scale annual cleanups every year, in April on Earth Day and in September for BC Rivers Day. Honourable Speaker, I spoke with Nikki Reckman, the president of Chilliwack-Vedder River Cleanup Society, and she shared about the endless energy of the volunteers, specifically mentioning Ross Aikenhead, a director and a, quote, relentless volunteer. She also described partnerships throughout the community with the City of Chilliwack, the Fraser Valley Regional District, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, BC Conservation Officers, and a very valued friendship with Scott Verscher of Valley Waste and Recycling, who supports the important work by providing free bins and pickups. So what can the incredible anglers, volunteers, and partners of our community accomplish when they combine their passion, energy, and environmental stewardship? Well, Mr. Speaker, since 2002, over 6,000 volunteers have given over almost 27,000 hours of effort and have cleaned up over 129 metric tons of garbage from the Chilliwack River Valley and Vedder River riparian areas. That's a lot of garbage, most of which is a result of illegal dumping or irresponsible recreating, which brings me to the message they wanted to share. Please recreate responsibly. Take with you what you brought. Would the House please join me on this World Oceans Day, which is perfect, to thank the incredible volunteers of the Chilliwack-Vedder River Cleanup Society and all the volunteers across British Columbia who care for our important waterways.
Member for Delta South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whether it's the smell of mini donuts, the sight of super dogs flying through an obstacle course, or the unmistakable sound of the wooden roller coaster, Vancouver's Pacific National Exhibition holds a special place in the hearts of most British Columbians. And it's no different for me and my family. My grandfather, John Payton, began showing cattle and horses at the PNE in the 1930s, and I even have one of his first place ribbons from 1938 on my lapel. My dad, Ian Payton Sr., also showed cattle at the PNE and was livestock superintendent of the PNE in the 1950s. For many years, my brother Dave was the official livestock veterinarian at the PNE. As for me, I showed cattle at the PNE in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s through the 4-H program and beyond. I have also been a member of the PNE Agriculture Advisory Committee, where I have served for more than 30 years. Mr. Speaker, I'm talking a lot about agriculture because while the PNE includes thrilling rides, midway games, and tasty treats, it's also a huge agriculture attraction each year for city dwellers. And a highlight for the year for 4-H kids traveling to the big city from all parts of BC to participate in the PNE 4-H Week. I've also had the opportunity for 35 years to serve as the auctioneer at the annual PNE 4-H auction. It's a chance for city folks to see just how well farm animals are cared for and observe a livestock auction up close. Additionally, the 15-day summer fair typically attracts thousands of guests for its shows, exhibits, sporting events, amusement rides, and concerts. However, the fair was forced to cancel last year, which really hurt its bottom line and meant thousands of jobs lost, as the fair is BC's largest employer for young people. The cancellation was a huge blow to the PNE, whose future remains in jeopardy after a year of financial loss. The 111-year-old exhibition is likely to lose nearly $15 million due to closures over the past year, and is in desperate need of $8 million in financial aid to avoid shutting down. Mr. Speaker, the province must step up and save this iconic BC anchor attraction. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Coquitlam Burke Mountain.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise virtually today to recognize 2 residents of Coquitlam Burke Mountain who are carrying out commendable activities to raise the spirits of their neighbors during COVID-19 state of emergency. Adam Turpin has faithfully continued to sing his nightly rendition of O Canada in front of his home at 7 p.m. for the past 425 evenings in a row to honor frontline and healthcare workers for their efforts during this pandemic. I joined Adam a few weeks ago to congratulate him on his 400th performance. Adam is a music teacher and professional singer. He says it brings him great joy to acknowledge frontline workers as he wants them to know their work is much appreciated. He also brings cheer to his neighbors and other visitors who enjoy his bass baritone version of our national anthem. Early in the pandemic, Susan Walter, another constituent of mine, thought she would be a good neighbor while making use of scraps of cloth she had accumulated over time. She started sewing face masks and has now given away over 1,400 of them while collecting several $1,000s in donations to support the work of her 2 favorite charities. Susan says her fingers are still limber after all this sewing, and the thrill she feels whenever someone stops at the wooden box in front of her house to pick up a mask or 2 has not diminished. Members, I'm sure you all know someone like Adam or Susan in your ridings, unsung heroes. Please join me in acknowledging Adam Turpin and Susan Walker, 2 generous community-minded individuals who are deeply committed to spreading warmth and happiness during these stressful COVID times. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Madam Clerk.
Oral questions by members.
Member for West Vancouver, Capilano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know women have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, and unemployment for young women is 11% higher. Women have dealt with the stress of juggling work and childcare needs. 4 years ago, this Premier promised to, quote, bring in $10 a day childcare, end quote. But he has failed miserably to do so, and instead of actual assistance today, parents get bungled and multiple misleading government news releases. Can the Premier confirm that only 6,000 childcare spaces have been opened to date by this second-term government?
Minister of State for Childcare.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. For many, many years, British Columbian families have been struggling with the lack of affordable, high-quality early learning and childcare opportunities. When we became government in 2017, we were faced with the childcare chaos and crisis with the previous government, the former BC Liberal government's inactions that caused families to struggle for many, many years. We've started that journey to build and bring in a universal, high-quality, inclusive early learning and care system with over 3 dozen of strategies, including the fastest space creation ever in BC's history. And to put that in perspective, we have created and supported the creation of spaces twice more than the BC former Liberal government has created in 16 long years.
Member for West Vancouver, Capilano supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, interestingly enough, between 2005 and 2017, the BC Liberals created 39,959 spaces, which is on average 3,030 spaces per year. So let's hope, Mr. Speaker, that the Premier's NDP math isn't being taught to our children. In estimates, the minister was clear, quote, 6,000 spaces have been opened, end quote. The Premier told every family in British Columbia they would get $10 a day childcare. He has failed to deliver. Will the Premier commit to stop with the talk, stop making even more promises and announcements, and actually deliver on the ones he's already made to parents?
Minister of State for Childcare.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. The member opposite can throw out any information they want, but that's incorrect. We have been accelerating the creation of
Members,
spaces.
come to order.
Well, we have been accelerating the creation of spaces and created twice more of the spaces in 3 years than the former BC Liberal government has created in 16 years together. And we have been bringing affordabilities to tens and thousands of families. 90% of providers in this province are joining our fee reduction program to bring down the cost of childcare up to $350 a month. When the former government actually took away childcare subsidy from BC families that caused families to face fee increases of $100, $200 per month. We are bringing $10 a day and affordable childcare to tens and thousands of families in British Columbia. We're proud of the work that we do when the other side of the House voted against our Childcare BC plan every step of the way.
Member for Fraser-Nicola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we have a quote from the Minister from estimates last week, and I quote, "About 6,000 spaces have been opened." So, which information is true?
Member, one member at a time.
Or is it the Minister's statements today talking about throwing out numbers? Mr. Speaker, it happens all too frequently. The Premier makes a big promise, then botches it and hopes people forget. People like Advocate Sharon Gregson hasn't forgotten. Quote, "It is not okay for the BC government to put forward a minuscule commitment compared to what they promised." End quote. 2 elections in a row, Minister. The Premier made the promise of $10 a day childcare, and then he bungled it. Can the Premier tell us why he has chosen to break his promise to parents not once, but twice?
Minister of State for Childcare.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. We need to remember where we came from. The former BC Liberal government has left a chaotic system that we have been trying to fix since 2017. And I'm going to share this with the opposite member that they need to face the reality that it is since we became government, every single week, there is a new childcare spaces being created and being supporting families across BC communities. This is what a single parent, Sarah, has to say. If the opposite member doesn't want to hear what parents are saying, then why are you asking the question when you've neglected the childcare crisis for 16 years? Through the chair. Sorry. This is what Sarah, a single parent, has to say. The new affordable childcare benefit has been tremendous help to my family. As a single mom, this financial support has been instrumental in giving me the opportunity to go back to school to return for a new profession. And that was not available when the other side of the House were in government. We have bringing down the cost of childcare to tens and thousands of families. We are creating new childcare spaces across BC communities every single week. We are supporting early childhood educators with the wage enhancement. This year, September, early childhood educators will get a $4 an hour wage enhancement. When the other side of the House, when they were in government, they took wage top up from early childhood educators.
Who's asking a question, please? Can we have one member asking a question, or everybody wants to ask a question? Member for Fraser-Nicola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, to the Minister, the numbers you're throwing out, a child care space every week is 52 spaces. Last week, it was, in estimates, about 6,000 spaces have been opened, and that's a direct quote from the Minister. So what is it, Minister? Despite the Premier's clear promise 4 years ago, the Minister confirmed in estimates that there is no plan in place for universal $10 a day childcare. Quote, "Different funding models are definitely being taken into consideration," end quote. This Premier has gone from universal $10 a day daycare to prototype sites to some alternative plan. Can the Premier tell us exactly what this alternative funding plan is?
Minister of State for Childcare.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I really want to take this opportunity to thank all the childcare providers, early childhood educators, advocates who have been working with us together to make sure we can create an early learning and care system for BC families. We need to learn how to bring down the cost of childcare when the other side of the house, when they were in government, ignored the crisis. We have a fee reduction program that's bringing down the cost of childcare up to $350 a month, with 90% of providers joining this program. We also have the affordable childcare benefit.
Members, Minister, continue.
We also have the affordable childcare benefit that brings $10 a day childcare to tens and thousands of families, along with the prototype site. So many families has benefited from our program, and we have this space creation that's the fastest in BC's history. And if the member opposite want to hear what community is saying, this is a quote from the city of Prince George. I quote, Chris Bone, the city of, from the Prince George social planner manager, is saying, I quote, at the time when the former Liberal government, that's, I continue to quote, there wasn't enough money available to help creating spaces that were required for childcare. But the environment is very different in 2019 because thankfully, we now know there is funding available to help create the spaces. And that's the actions our government has been taking. But you ignored the crisis for 16 years.
Members, you're wasting your precious time. Leader of Third Party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. As low case numbers hold steady and more British Columbians get their first dose of the COVID vaccine, it has been a sigh of relief after a year and a half, almost a year and a half of severe stress. And we have a lot of reasons to be cautiously optimistic. And yet, once again, we can see trends elsewhere. In the UK, due to the Delta variant, the 7-day rolling average of cases has doubled from 2,400 on May 28th to 5,000 on June 7th. Yesterday, Dr. Gustafson said that the Delta variant of COVID-19 is still, quote, relatively uncommon, with just over 500 cases identified in BC. In the Peel region of Ontario, however, they're just a couple weeks away before the variant takes hold, according to their medical officer of health, Dr. Lowe. And in Nova Scotia, Chief Medical Officer Dr. Strang says that while the province is, quote, at the tail end of the third wave, the Delta variant, first identified in India, is something to be concerned about. The emerging information, Dr. Strang says, about the Delta variant shows it is more easily transmitted and not as well protected against by one dose of the vaccine. This is further evidence to how we need to remain cautious until the majority of Nova Scotians are fully vaccinated. In a few short weeks, Canada-wide travel may be on the table, including to regions with high transmission of the Delta variant. My question for you, Honourable Speaker, is to the Minister of Health. How is his government managing the risk of that the Delta variant poses to the many British Columbians with only one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine?
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the member for her question. What I think the evidence suggests is that we have to continue to pursue our immunization campaign with the kind of speed we've been engaged in the last month. For example, last week, 380,000 new doses administered in our province, significantly more. And as at the end of the week, 98% of the Pfizer vaccine that we had received from the federal government was in people's arms, which I think is an extraordinary achievement. It's also the reason why we have taken a step-by-step plan to limiting or easing restrictions in British Columbia, such that the step 2 will not occur before June 15th, and the step 3, under any circumstances, won't occur before July 1st. Step by step, prudent approach. In addition, and this is a concern, as the member suggests, with other jurisdictions that may have lower levels ultimately of immunizations, such as some areas of the United States, and less testing for variants of concern, less whole genome sequencing than is done in British Columbia. The best way, as Dr. Gustafson said yesterday, for us to prevent against these variants is to continue with first dose and second dose immunization. That's exactly what we're doing. We're continuing to monitor the COVID-19 pandemic and continuing to take a step-by-step approach to the easing of restrictions, considering every day the circumstances on hospitalization, on critical care, on cases, and on vaccination.
Leader of Third Party Supplemental.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the response. And yes, vaccinations and the immunization program, as we can see, are moving us in the right direction. However, the variants and emerging variants of concern remain a problem in many places in Canada and the world. The one thing that British Columbia hasn't done that other places have done is to lean into rapid testing. Yesterday in Nova Scotia, the Halifax News reported that the government in Nova Scotia is going to expand rapid testing. Again, this is a quote from the newspaper, "We've been working with employers and the federal government to pilot a workplace testing program across the province," said the Chief Medical Officer of Health. Almost 50 employers, as well as the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, have signed on. Dr. Strang says these employers will get free rapid point-of-care tests as well as training and support to help them set up testing programs in their workplaces. As they went through the recent third wave, Nova Scotia has determined that they discovered 10% of asymptomatic cases of COVID through their use of rapid testing in that province. My question for you, Honourable Speaker, is to the Minister of Health. We've learned a lot in the last 16 months about COVID-19. We've been able to look at other jurisdictions and how they've responded and what has been successful and not. As we enter into this phase of the pandemic, where we hope to see the cases reduced, will we be more assertively going for an elimination strategy that uses rapid testing in order to keep our cases low?
Minister of Health.
Well, Honourable Speaker, one thing that has worked in British Columbia, and we've seen it as other jurisdictions have reviewed what has happened, especially with respect to testing, we have done in British Columbia, is have our provincial health officer and our medical health officers lead on the question of testing, to use the gold standard PCR testing principally, and to incrementally use more rapid testing, which is what we're doing right now. We will continue to follow that advice of experts, of putting the resources and the means in the hands of experts to deal and to reduce the transmission of COVID-19 in British Columbia. I think that is and continues to be the right course. Of course, the government and public health does not always get it right, but we have continued to adapt and put the resources in the hands of those that can make the best decisions for all of us. And we're going to continue to do that. There will be, and there will continue to be, as the technology improves, greater and greater use of rapid testing in British Columbia, as there are in other jurisdictions. And the decisions around what we should do in that regard will be led by public health, as they have been from the beginning of this pandemic.
Member for Surrey South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. BC has the dubious distinction of having the worst gender pay gap in Canada. Between the COVID-19 pandemic and this government's failing childcare promises, things aren't looking a lot better. The Premier could start by keeping his snap election promise to pass pay equity legislation, which has been introduced 4 times now by the official opposition. Will the Premier keep his promise to voters on pay equity?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm really pleased to get up on my feet and talk about equity. We just heard from the Minister of State for Childcare, who talked about a significant childcare plan, finally organizing for the lives of women. So many of us have suffered and struggled to find childcare, and we finally have a plan in place here, Mr. Speaker. That is the biggest social program we can do for equity for women in this province.
Member for Surrey South Supplemental.
Well, it's disappointing that the minister is completely missing the point. This isn't about childcare. It isn't about minimum wage. It's about pay equity. When I first proposed pay equity legislation, the Premier called it, quote, a political stunt, end quote. With the pandemic having delivered a crushing blow to gender equity, the Premier's still missing in action. How much longer will it take the Premier, or will the Premier make women wait on pay equity? It's a simple question.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, women are often the servers in the restaurant industry. I'm sure the member is well aware of that. I'm sure there's many of us who've had that role. And we got rid of the server wage. If I recall, the other folks on the other side of the House thought that was perfectly acceptable, Mr. Speaker. We've done more for women than the people on the other side of the House have ever done.
Member for Surrey White Rock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know we're in a crisis when it comes to addictions and mental health. And we know the plan laid out by this government is simply not working. A report from the BC Women's Health Foundation shows that over 40% of women in British Columbia don't have access to the mental health they need during this pandemic. More than 40%. This government is failing women who need assistance. My question to the Premier is a simple one. Will he provide women with the help they need, not based on their ability to pay, but solely based on their need for treatment?
Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the foundation of our government's work through this ministry, just the first time that a Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions has been established in Canada is to build that system of care that did not exist when we formed government. We've been working hard every day to build up that continuum of care so that people can access both mental health and addiction services when and where they need it. There is more to do, there is no doubt, but the progress that we have been able to make already, I imagine that the member opposite would be in support of. We've just put a historic $500 million for mental health and addictions service so that people can get care when and where they need it into this year's budget. There's never been such a new infusion of investment into British Columbia's in the province's history. I would imagine that the member would support our the 100 new adult treatment beds that we've added this year already, our budget commitment to do another almost 200, our expansion, particularly during COVID, which has made everything worse, from the addictions crisis to mental health, for us to stand up new counseling grants, for us to put $25 million into the system in quick order with the support from across the aisle, to stand up community counseling grants, particularly focused on women, our new investments in eating disorders, into every single health authority, and working with nonprofits on the front line. There is more to do, but absolutely we are working hard every day to build that system up, despite the setback that the pandemic has posed.
Member for Surrey White Rock, supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And given this minister's past performance in last week's estimates, I was hopeful, optimistic, that she would not continue to politicize incorrectly, I might add, such an important file such as mental health and addictions, but she continues to amaze. What I will point out is from the study, 2/3 of women that are essential workers are experiencing worry, anxiety, or stress, and 2 in 5 are experiencing depression. 63% of younger women reported feeling worry, anxiety, or stress. Indigenous women and those from a minority community are more inclined to rate their emotional health poorly. So again, to the Premier, will he do the right thing and ensure the services are provided and that no one has to choose between feeding their families, paying their rent, or getting the support they desperately need?
Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In every way, despite the setback of the pandemic and the huge surge of stress that people are under, everybody's mental health is worse. The toxic illicit drug supply is more poisonous and more people are dying every day. It is a tragedy and one that we have tried to stand up new resources every day in order to meet. But keep in mind, and while fighting two public health emergencies, we've been building up a system of care, expanding Foundry, enhancing suicide prevention in post-secondary institutions, standing up 24/7 access to counseling, no cost and low cost counseling across the province, virtual counseling available in every region, 80 new seats to train new mental health workers. At every aspect of the healthcare system, we are building in new supports for people. There is more to do, no doubt. But if the member's going to make comments about my performance in estimates last week, for him to spend 3 days with the minister and not ask a single question about Pathway to Hope, not a single question about the service plan that we're required to file associated with the budget. If he wanted to ask questions about the system of care that we're building up, he had 3 days to do it and failed to.
Member for Peace River North.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. The Minister keeps talking around the issues, which isn't what women and those suffering with mental health issues need right now. They need the Minister to listen and to act. More than 40% of women reported not having access to the mental health supports that they need. Getting help requires a referral from a doctor, which can take months, or private counselling, which isn't covered by the province. Will the Premier commit to actually investing...
Let's listen to the question, please.
Will the Premier commit to actually investing in a seamless mental health and addiction system that ensures people get the help that they need it when they need it?
Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is exactly the system that we are working hard every day to build, one that did not exist before, one that we are investing in unprecedented ways through our budget. But here's some of the tools that we've already added to the mental health, addictions, and healthcare system that are already making, despite the setback that the pandemic has posed, that are already creating more access to people regardless of their pocketbook. We are embedding mental health care services on a team-based approach across the province to have already opened 23 new urgent primary care centres. That is same-day access. We've opened BC's first mental health and addictions substance use urgent response in Surrey, opened a 75-bed new mental health and substance use wellness centre at Royal Columbian last August, provided $15 million to 49 community organizations to provide a no-cost and low-cost counselling, $2.4 million to 20 other organizations to expand counseling virtually and in person. We're helping to train 100 South Asian youth ambassadors to be able to help get the word out to people and remove the stigma about asking for help. We've expanded Foundry Virtual and now funded a new Foundry app so people can engage in an online system, again, no cost, built for and by young people, and the list goes on. There is so much more for us to do, but in every way, there's more support available for people who are in need, and we urge anybody who's struggling under the mental health impacts of COVID to ask for the help that they need, and we will get that to them.
Member for Peace River North, supplemental.
Mr. Speaker, the results, though, aren't there for everyone to see. The minister continues to speak off of her stale speaking notes day after day with no end in sight, and the crisis continues to worsen. The reality is, and particularly women, they are not getting the help that they need. Racialized women face even more challenges. Michaela Shannon with the Support Network for Indigenous Women and Women of Color says, and I quote, for racialized person...
Members will come to order.
For racialized...
Members...
So I'll read a quote again from Michaela Shannon with the Support Network for Indigenous Women and Women of Color. And she says, For a racialized person to be able to speak to a therapist from a racialized background, someone who understands the negative and traumatic effects of racism from their own personal experience, makes a massive positive impact in the success of their treatment, end quote. The Premier's in charge. His budget is bigger than the mental health and addictions budget. So will he take leadership, break down the barriers, and get these women the help that they need?
Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Anybody that is struggling with mental health challenges, and lots of people are, and addictions as well, please go to our website, gov.bc.ca/COVID-19 mental health supports. You'll see a whole list of translated services.
Members from the opposition bench, please come to order. Minister will continue.
Services that are translated, services that are being stood up by fantastic community organizations, multiple languages. Please, we want people to reach out. If the member has got a particular constituent that he wants me to talk with, I'm very happy to learn more. But I'll also note that $2.7 billion is spent every year on mental health and addictions. I'm sure the member would be glad to know, not inside a new ministry, but integrated across government through the healthcare ministry, through education, through Ministry of Children and Family Development. That's the way we're going to tackle this terrible mental health and addictions crisis.
Thank you. Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, let's be clear. This is a minister that's a minister on paper only, and by the answers in estimates last week, it made it very clear that every other minister is actually responsible for approving funding and programming or not. But, Mr. Speaker, it seems day in, day out in this House, when we bring forward questions—
Minister, come to order, please. Opposition House Leader, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It seems every day in this House when we bring forward questions and concerns from our constituents and people across this province, this government gets very, very amazed that we would have the audacity to remind them of their own promises and their own commitments and refuse to actually acknowledge or answer based on those. Today, we asked very simple questions, straightforward questions about their twice promised $10 a day universal child care. We asked the minister about her own statements and estimates only a week ago that only 6,000 spaces were created under this government's watch. And instead, this minister has the audacity to stand in this House today and try to give a completely different answer. We ask questions and try to get a bill called on pay equity that this government has promised in elections to bring forward. If they don't want to debate our bill, where is the government's bill after 4.5 years, after 2 elections? Instead, the Minister of Finance gives a very dismissive question that ranges around everything and anything to do but pay equity. And then we get into mental health supports for women who have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. So again, to the Premier. The Premier is in charge of all of this. The Premier has made promises in 2 elections on all of this. When will the Premier start to deliver even one of these things? The Premier has also said that he's all in favor of a good idea no matter what side of the House it comes from. So when is the Premier going to live up to even one of his commitments in this House? And when is the Premier, at a minimum, going to start bringing forward the supports that the women that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID desperately need for their mental health supports moving forward?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, you know, I find it very interesting that on the other side of the House, you know, the members opposite suddenly have a newfound interest in women. I recall when they were in government, they actually eliminated the women's ministry. They eliminated it. Gone, just gone. They did nothing to advance the pay equity when they were in government. They absolutely ignored the rising cost of childcare. They even brought in legislation in 2002 that led to the largest layoff of women in this province's history. these were racialized women, Mr. Speaker.
Members.
They slashed legal aid services, Mr. Speaker. That affected women so significantly. They even deducted childcare support payments for women on disability. They refused to protect jobs of people fleeing domestic violence. And of course, they refused to increase minimum wage, Mr. Speaker. Now, there is a lot of work for us to do to make up for lost time. We have a significant investment in childcare, the biggest investment in childcare in BC's history that is actively going on, thousands and thousands of spaces. We're building housing for women fleeing violence. Again, thousands and thousands of spaces. We have a parliamentary secretary who is dedicated, absolutely dedicated, to making sure that all ministries are addressing women's issues. And we have representation, Mr. Speaker. We have representation on this side of the House. I can't wait till all of my colleagues are here. And on this side of the House, we have more women than the opposition has for all of their members, Mr. Speaker. And I can't wait to show everybody.
The bell ends the question period. Question period is over, members. During Monday morning sitting, the chair issued several cautions to members participating in debate on the private member's motion under consideration by the House. Throughout the debate, several members of the official opposition caucus spoke about the conduct of the Attorney General and Minister responsible for housing, and used debate on the motion under consideration by the House to bring accusations against the Attorney General. The Assistant Deputy Speaker, who was in the chair, brought members' attention 3 times to Standing Order 40, subsection 2, which states, and I quote, "No member shall use offensive words against any member of this House," unquote. As I indicated I would do at the conclusion of Monday morning sitting, I have reviewed the transcript of the proceedings and wish to provide further direction to all members. Parliamentary Practice in British Columbia, 5th edition at page 151, states that in making remarks in the House, members should bear in mind the following. Members cannot quote another member's words to avoid offending Standing Order 40. A member cannot do indirectly what the member is unable to do directly. And the conduct of a member cannot be canvassed in debate, nor can charges of a personal character be made, except by a substantive motion for which notice is required. Erskine May, the Procedural Authority of the United Kingdom Parliament 25th edition, at pages 496 to 497 states, "The general requirements of moderation in parliamentary language are viewed as particularly important when members are speaking of other members. Not because other members require specific protection, but in order to preserve the character of parliamentary debate. Furthermore, in the House of Commons of the United Kingdom, Erskine May 25th edition at page 497 states, "The Speaker has ruled that a member who intends to mention another member's name in the chamber in a form which amounts to personal reflection, but which, in short of the kind which anyway would require a substantive motion, should, unless the other member is present, inform the other member in advance in a timely and reasonable manner. The same principle has been upheld in our own House as reflected on page 160 of the Parliamentary Practice in British Columbia 5th edition. Given the nature of the comments made during the course of Monday's debate and the consideration that I have outlined, this was done in a manner that I deemed to be conclusively unparliamentary. Furthermore, I believe it to be a misuse of the intent of private members' motions, which afford private members with an opportunity every Monday morning to express their views on issues of importance to them and not to make direct, indirect, or veiled remarks about other members of the House. In future debate, I ask members to be mindful of the guidance that the chair has provided. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
Orders of the day.
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. In this chamber, I call estimates debate for the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation. In the Douglas Fir Room, Section A, I call estimates for the Ministry of Forest, Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development. And in Section C, the Birch Room, I call continued estimates debate for the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries.
Committee Chair.
The committee will stand in recess for 5 minutes. All right, members, I'd like to call a committee to order, but I'll ask members first to turn on your cameras if you're at home or if you're in this place to take your seats so we can get going on estimates of jobs, economic recovery, and innovation, the ministry thereof. Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Sorry, I was just setting up, but I move vote number 35, resolved that a sum not exceeding $78,648,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of Ministry of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation Ministry operations to 31st of March 2022.
Thank you, Minister. Seeing the member for Kamloops South Thompson.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you. And good morning to the ministry staff who are here to support us in this process. So I think with the limited time that we have this morning, I'd like to focus on Stronger BC and just walk through some of the different, or begin to walk through some of the different programs. And I want to start with this sort of general piece. I think we can all agree that there was a lot of uncertainty when the pandemic hit, a lot of unknowns, a lot of anxiety that built up, and so there was a need to respond quickly to support people, respond quickly to support business, respond quickly to support communities. And as a refresher, it may seem like quite some time ago, but it was in March of 2020, so over a year ago, about 14 or 15 months ago, when this House unanimously came together and very quickly, frankly, unified behind a support package for the pandemic, again, to ensure that government was beginning the process of doing everything possible with the full support of this House to support people and businesses and communities. Despite that package being approved in March of 2020 and the Stronger BC component being announced in September of 2020, when you look at the 2020 fiscal year, only 40% of the dollars that were approved in March of 2020 were actually out the door by the end of the fiscal year. So I guess the first question to the minister would be this: does he quibble with the 40% number? If it's not 40%, what is the number in terms of the total dollar value of supports that were out the door in the hands of those that the supports were intended for by the end of 2020? And does he think that if indeed the number was 40%, does he believe that that was an acceptable level of disbursement of the supports to the end of December 2020, recognizing these dollars were approved 9 months earlier?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the Honourable Member for the question. And of course, a big thank you to all the amazing people within my ministry who are here today and helping support this estimates process. So the member, I think, left out a few details, so I thought I'd just go back and walk through how the process unveiled. Of course, the member mentioned that we're in a pandemic, and there were a lot of uncertainties about how the pandemic would affect people. And I think what makes me most proud of government and our amazing civil servants is the ability to adapt and adjust as the pandemic changed. Throughout the pandemic time. You know, the pandemic that was in March wasn't the pandemic in September, wasn't the pandemic in Christmas, and wasn't the pandemic that we have now. But we've been able to show an extreme amount of innovation and flexibility as a government, and certainly makes me very proud. So the member mentioned that dollars were approved in March. He'll also know that over spring and early summer of 2020, government spent time trying to assess where the needs will be, where the pressure points are, where the challenges may be. And Stronger BC projects were announced on September 17th, 2021. And so I think that's an important date of the announcement for the context of this conversation. And initiatives that were fully developed and approved were launched during the period when there was an election. So a lot of programs were actually announced and launched by government at that time. And I think for the record, we should frame there was 3 key themes that were developed at that time. And I'll go through them briefly, just so that it's on the record. We had stronger supporting BC businesses. We had the small and medium-sized business grants. We had agri-tech grants, which was $7.5 million. Manufacturing grants was $17 million. We had launch online and digital marketing boot camps, $44 million. Mass timber demonstration projects, which was $3 million. Support for agriculture businesses, $5.6 million. Increasing BC food production and processing, $1.95. Small farm business acceleration program and provincial replant program was $0.89 million. On-farm innovation top-up program was $1.6 million. Restoring Confidence app was $2 million. Digitization of industrial land, $0.7 million. Destination BC Tourism Recovery Strategy, which was $5 million. Tourism Task Force for Indigenous Tourism Recovery Fund, which was $5 million. Of course, part of Stronger BC was getting people back to work. There was $1.8 million for a youth employment program for parks conservation services, $25 million for community job creation projects and rural opportunities around wildfire risk reduction, $12 million for forest employment program, $0.43 million for recreation sites, trails and youth crew program expansion, $20 million for employment supports for people with disabilities facing barriers, $10.53 million targeted training for health and human services, $20 million for short-term skills training for in-demand jobs, $2 million for micro-credentialing, $15 million for Indigenous community skills training and education. And then we also had a stream for stronger communities and $1.9 million for anti-racism during the restart and recovery phase, which we know was critically important given the rise in hate and racism that we've seen through the pandemic. Technology and innovation connectivity, which was additional $90 million. A mine remediation project, which was $1.57 million, Building Innovation Fund and Recapitalization, additional $8 million, Commercial Vehicle Innovation Challenge, ARC program, which was $30 million, the GO Electricity Specialty Use Vehicle Incentive Program, $31 million, Proposed Assess Clean Energy Roadmap Pilot Program, $2 million, BC Park Stimulus Proposal Construction Projects was $5 million, species and ecosystems conservation and restoration, which was 10.21, watershed initiative, wetlands projects, 27 million, Clean Coast, Clean Waters Initiative, of course on Clean Oceans Day today, 14.83 million, recycled plastics and manufacturing stimulus, which was 5 million, remote and rural community access program, which was 25.65 million, air access grants, 15.75 million, return to school funding, of course, which was critically important, 45.6 million. Of course, there was funding for jobs in healthcare, 299 million. Mental health support for, was 2 million additional. Youth suicide prevention and life promotion was 2.33. Honourable member will know that that's a significant amount of supports that were put in place, announced in September. And that doesn't even go into all the other government supports that we've put in place, which the member knows is quite comprehensive. Of course, all members of this House supported that. And I think all those supports together are quite substantial. And certainly I think all those supports have put us in a good place, given that we're just coming out of the third wave and brighter days are ahead.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Well, the range of comprehensive supports that the minister just rattled off and that he speaks of may sound good when he rattles it off on a list, but we are still in the 8th position across the country when it comes to direct support, direct relief direct grants for business. I want to ask the minister with respect to the Stronger BC. I'm well aware that Stronger BC was launched in September. The question would be this: why did it take 6 months? The dollars were all approved in this legislature, in this chamber, in March of 2020, and the government didn't create and launch Stronger BC until September, and waited for the majority of the supports for business in particular didn't get pushed out the door until, or didn't begin to get pushed out the door until September, when Stronger BC was announced. There was a tremendous amount of pain that small businesses in particular felt in that ensuing period between March and September of 2020. Can the minister advise this House, why did the government wait for 6 months? Why did it take 6 months? Why did the government wait so long to push Stronger BC out the door, which contained critical supports and programs for people and businesses across this province?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And it does feel like a million years ago, but and so in that time, maybe in all of our collective memory, a lot of the things that happened right away may have been forgotten by all members. Even when I was thinking back about it and thinking, well, what happened at that time? But there's been so many things that have happened during this intense time for everyone. I think the member will know that immediately that the government moved to cut property taxes, cut and deferred others to reduce pressures on the business community. We prohibited commercial evictions, which was critically important at that time because there was a lot of stress being faced. We forgave 3 months of hydro bills. We worked with the federal government to provide a wage subsidy and commercial rent program, which was all things at that time that were requested from the business community. And during that time, there was a lot of changes happening. The member will remember there was a lot of panic, a lot of uncertainty around where the needs will be, how the pandemic will actually play out in our communities, in our province, and the country, and the world. And so there was a lot of consultation being done around where are the real needs, where are the real pressure points, and I think that the reason why Stronger BC was launched in a good way was that everyone felt listened to. Everyone felt that their needs were reflected in the Stronger BC plan. And again, that's why we were able to see 99% job recovery rate here in BC. We have a resilient economy, but all the measures that we put together through thoughtful consultation led us to a good place. And of course, even from there, we had to adjust. As the pandemic changed, we continue to adjust programming. But I think it's important to note for the member that during that period of late March to summer, lots of actions were taken to support businesses, and further supports were put in place when Stronger BC was launched.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Well, my question relates to, again, direct supports, direct relief to business, and small business in particular. I've asked why, was the minister satisfied or that having 40% of dollars earmarked in the form of direct relief and support for businesses is out the door by the end of 2020, if that's acceptable or not. He hasn't answered that. I've asked if he, what the heck the delay was for the 6-month period of time it took from March of 2020 to September of 2020 when Stronger BC was finally announced. Stronger BC was the moment where the very first direct grant was actually announced by this government. And there's been a bit more on that since, but the very first grant that was announced was a small and medium-sized business recovery grant, which was included in September's Stronger BC strategy. There was no mention of it or launching of it prior to that point, which meant there was no ability for businesses to access it. They didn't know about it. It didn't exist. So I'd like to ask the minister this question. If it took 6 months from March of 2020 to September of 2020, was the reason that the government didn't push the Stronger BC plan out the door sooner, was it because the government was holding it back so that it could be pushed out about a week before the Premier decided to call a snap an unnecessary provincial election?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And the member was asking about direct supports, and that's what I answered. All the measures around cutting property taxes, prohibiting commercial evictions, these are direct supports that were for businesses. That's what was asked. Now, the members asked about the programs and I didn't maybe understand in the beginning, but now I know where he's going. He wants to know in the calendar year. And so I'll update him that obviously he knows the small and medium-sized business recovery grant program continues to be available for businesses. The agri-tech grants, which I mentioned, are supports for businesses, direct supports, completed. The manufacturing grants continue. And that process is ongoing. The Launch Online supports were available for businesses and still available because we increased the amount of dollars available. The mass timber demonstration projects completed. Supports for agriculture businesses, the food hubs completed. Increasing BC food production and processing completed. Small farm business acceleration program and the provincial replant program completed. On-farm innovation top-up program completed. Restoring Confidence app completed. Digitization and industrial land work is ongoing. Destination BC tourism recovery strategy is ongoing. The Indigenous Tourism Recovery Fund is ongoing. I mean, I can go through all the programs if the member likes, but you know, majority of the programs are completed, and many of the programs that are still needed are ongoing. And these are direct supports. And again, one of the highest per capita supports in this country for people and businesses. We're really proud of that. Again, we debated the CCPA report yesterday. I'm happy to spend all afternoon debating the CCPA report because it's good news for government. It shows that the supports we put into people and businesses were meaningful, 3% of our GDP, very important investments we made into our people. And that's reflected in the fact that in the middle of a third wave, we're at 99% of pre-pandemic employment. That's a positive sign for us, something we all should be proud of. It means the Stronger BC plan was effective in the way it was designed, the consultation process that happened to ensure that it hit the right metrics for where our stakeholders believed we need to be. Stronger BC was a success, and it was a success because we took time to listen to all of our stakeholders, and we didn't wait, as I mentioned to the member, for September. We put supports in immediately, but we put further supports in September, and we continue to add supports as we know the needs arrive.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Well, the Minister talks about 99% pre-pandemic employment levels. The province is at 99% based on a massive increase in the size of the public sector, a very significant drop in the number of private sector jobs from 1 year ago, a huge increase in part-time jobs, a big decrease in full-time jobs, and an underutilization rate of about 10%, meaning when you take the unemployment rate and you add on all of those folks out there who have literally given up looking for work, and you add on the reality that a lot of people in many sectors are getting fewer hours and fewer shifts, you've got a heck of a lot of pain still, as reflected in an underutilization rate of about 10%. So let's not get too far ahead of ourselves here in terms of this 99% employment rate based on pre-pandemic levels when you factor in this massive shift to public sector jobs, this massive shift to part-time jobs, and again an ever-increasing underutilization rate. We'll dive into all of those numbers a little bit more later. But I want to come back to this concept of direct supports. I want to make sure that the minister understands what I'm referring to here. What I'm referring to here is what any economist out there, what any anyone engaged in the financial sector, anyone that does any labor market analysis, anyone who knows their way around how to classify different types of supports for business, when people refer to direct supports, direct relief, direct grants, these are financial supports that are that are provided to business that don't have to be repaid, that don't have to be paid back. It's cash in the pocket. A deferral on taxes is not direct relief. deferred taxes have to be paid back. A loan, whether at zero interest or a low interest rate, still has to be paid back. The rent subsidies that were provided still, and the freeze on rent, none of these are permanent, and there are still financial obligations that carry into the future for that particular small business. None of the above, deferrals, loans, and so forth, are direct supports. Direct supports are when you put a program on the table like the circuit breaker grant or the small and medium-sized business recovery grant. Again, dollars in pocket that don't have to be repaid. So let's just make sure we're on the same page here about what direct relief and direct grants are. And when we talk about how well British Columbia is doing in the context of the rest of the country, I suppose it's progress that the minister just referred to, amongst British Columbia is among the highest as opposed to saying number one. But again, British Columbia is number 8 when it comes to direct supports, direct relief, direct grants to business in this province. But I want to come back one more time to the minister's timing here, his comments on the timing of Stronger BC. And again, very simply, very directly, is the reason that the government waited 6 months from March 2020 to September of 2020 to push out Stronger BC, which was the first opportunity that direct relief in the form of the small and medium-sized business recovery grant as an example. The first time that direct relief was put on the table for businesses, small businesses in particular, was the 6-month delay in pushing that out the door because the government wanted to keep its powder dry in case the Premier called an election, which he indeed went ahead and did about a week after rolling Stronger BC out the door. And if it's not that explanation, could the minister please provide one?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And again, very proud of the highest per capita supports for people and businesses that we provide here, in British Columbia. Of course, as I said to the member, we can continue to debate. We have a report that states that we provided significant supports for British Columbians, and the member has a number that he's picked out of the air without any backing. If he has a report that says anything different than that, I'm happy to see that. But there's a bit of a narrative that's been coming from the opposition that I want to address, where they talk about where they frame the value of private sector jobs as more important than public sector jobs. The member will know that during the pandemic, we've been hiring teachers, we've been hiring care aides, we've been hiring contact tracers. These are good paying jobs. And I know that there's, certainly from many members of the opposition, perhaps not this honourable member, but many others, a real negative view of public sector jobs, public sector employees. And that was reflected today in question period when the Minister of Finance reminded this House that the single largest layoff of women in BC's history was done under the previous government's watch. So that frustration towards public sector employees has been clear in the history of the 16 years that they were in government. And my mom was one of those workers. And so we know it as a family of what that meant. And so I don't understand why we can't value teachers being hired the same as we do as private sector employees. So why we can't value care aides, the important work that contact tracers did during the pandemic. The list goes on. Why is it that we must say that all of a sudden their employment means less because it doesn't compare to a minimum wage job, say at McDonald's? I just don't understand that. The framing, the argument, the discussion. We are seeing we have 7,000 women who were working in minimum wage jobs or just slightly above minimum wage jobs who have gotten an opportunity to work within the healthcare system, good paying jobs, family supporting jobs. Like, we should be proud of that, taking care of our seniors so that our seniors are well taken care of through this pandemic. We should value those jobs. We shouldn't talk about how all of a sudden a private sector job at a fast food restaurant somehow has more value in both the wages and all the value in the work that they provide. We've been hiring people, ECEs, to provide support for childcare. And so I take it a little personal when the member raises the difference between the employment, as in some way that the employment has less value because that they're working for government. So I really appreciate the work that all those folks are doing. I'm proud of the work and anything that helps lift people up, and particularly women of color, Honourable Speaker, who have seen an opportunity to get higher paying wage jobs, working within government, better protections as workers. We all should be collectively proud of that. Now, the member talks about the timelines. He will know that, because I've already shared with him in this answer, we provided additional supports immediately. These supports were direct to businesses. It was what they were asking for. And then we did a consultation process. We had hundreds of suggestions and recommendations. It was very thorough, every ministry involved, looking at where assessing where the pressure points they would be potentially facing, trying to project how the pandemic will impact us, not knowing that the pandemic is going to continually change and our supports will need to change. That process took time. And it's not like we were the only jurisdiction grappling with this. All the provinces were looking at finding ways to support businesses throughout. And again, our motto here was, how can we keep things going in a safe way? We kept construction open. We kept a lot of our manufacturing going. We kept a lot of our schools, Honourable Speaker. I mean, I'm so proud of our teachers, of our superintendents, school boards for the work they did, direct impact on the economy. So, Honourable Speaker, I just wanted to make sure I clarified that, just so the member knows that on this side of the House we value the public sector employees. We value the work, and of course we're proud of that. And Stronger BC, again, launched in September and hit the mark. It hit the mark because we spent that time to make sure we knew where the challenges were and where the various associations were recommending that we put dollars to, and that was reflected in the positive review that we got from it.
Member, and we'll take one more question and then we'll adjourn. So, member.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Chair. Let me be clear that I think all members of this House value public sector jobs. I certainly do. I know my colleagues do, and I don't question that about any member on the other side. What I would say in response to the minister's answer to my last question just moments ago, what the heck has the minister got against private sector jobs? Private sector jobs are the ones that actually pay for themselves. Public sector jobs are actually paid for by the taxpayers of British Columbia. It's private sector jobs that actually power the economy, move the economy forward. It's a private sector-led jobs recovery that's absolutely critical for us to have that sustainable long-term economic recovery in the province. What has the minister got against that? And I also take issue with his insinuations around minimum wage jobs and almost some of his comments moments ago about fast food workers and minimum wage jobs and so forth. I don't understand why the blind spot on the importance of private sector jobs. And Chair, we're down 61,000 private sector jobs from 1 year ago. 61,100 fewer private sector jobs. That's been partially offset over this past year by 35,900 public sector jobs. But the point here is we cannot have a durable economic recovery without a robust private sector-led expansion of jobs. And so we'll get into more detail on that. But again, I want to ask. I'll keep asking the question until I get an answer. What accounts for the 6-month delay in Stronger BC being launched in September of 2020, when all of the dollars were approved unanimously by this House in March of 2020? Why did it take 6 months? Was it because the Premier wanted to and ended up calling a snap election a week after Stronger BC was announced in September of 2020?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And the member spoke about how great minimum wage jobs are, and I'll tell the member that my mom worked a minimum wage job. My aunts, my uncles worked minimum wage jobs. I was raised on a minimum wage job that my mom worked at, and I'll tell the member that it's tough for families. I'm not sure what his life experience was, but I can speak about my family and my friends who were new immigrants to this country and struggled on that. And not until they got jobs where my mom became an HU member, where she had some rights until they were taken away from her, did she see an opportunity to help her family rise up. And so I won't be lectured by that member about the value of minimum jobs, minimum wage jobs, unless he can tell me about his life experience, where he's experienced that. And I'd love to hear that because I respect people's life experiences. The private sector needed us. The private sector could not deal with the pandemic. We put in additional supports, over $1 billion to support the private sector so we can maintain employment, maintain people's livelihoods, ensure that businesses survive through this pandemic. We're proud of that. There were some people who say they're free marketers. Luckily, there's none of them here in the legislature anymore, who said, let the economy fall. They'll find a way to return themselves. The market will adjust and figure it out. But we chose the path of ensuring that we supported the private sector. And it's going to take a cooperative effort between the private sector and the public sector to see a strong economic recovery. And that has been my focus. It's been the focus of the Premier. It's been the focus of the Minister of Finance. We're going to continue to do that important work because that's the best way for us to have a strong recovery. Not one leading, but both working side by side. And that's been our model from the beginning, and look forward to talking about this in a lot more detail in the afternoon. Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And Honourable Chair, I move that the committee rise and report progress and ask leave to sit again.
Thank you, Minister. Members have heard the question. All those in favour indicate aye. Opposed indicate nay. Motion's carried. Madam Chair.
Mr. Speaker, Committee of Supply, Section B, reports progress on the estimates of the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation and asks leave to sit again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just wait a moment so we can move the mace. And when shall the committee sit again? Finance Minister, Acting Government House Leader.
At the next sitting.
So ordered. Committee Chair. You're good. We got you on that first one. Yeah. Committee Chair.
Mr. Speaker, Committee of Supply, Section A, reports progress on the estimates of the Ministry of Forests, Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development and asks leave to sit again.
And when shall the committee sit again? Government House Leader.
At the next sitting.
So ordered. Committee Chair.
Mr. Speaker, Committee of Supply Section C reports progress on the estimates of the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries and asks leave to sit again.
And when shall that committee sit again? Government House Leader.
At the next sitting.
So ordered. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the House do now adjourn.
Members, a vote is about to take place. The question is adjournment of the House. Those in favour, please indicate aye. Those opposed indicate nay. Motion is carried. The House stands adjourned until 1:30 this afternoon. Thank you.